How do you define success?
The definition of success, right? In some respects, people think of as just, purely economic. How much money do I make, right? Or it might be title or prestige or power. I mean, there's a lot of different versions of it. I think what I was most interested in getting at were some of the measures that Gallup has really measured across the world, right? The degree, for example, the degree to which you're engaged in your work, whatever that work is, right? Some of us has jobs that we hate. Some of us have jobs that we love. What's the real difference, right, in those things? And then overall well-being, right? How do you rate about and think about your life? And you can think about that on a number of dimensions, including things like community well-being and social well-being. And by the way, you can have high financial well-being and not make a ton of money because you're really good at saving and planning and using your money effectively. As an example, people who spend money on experiences have higher well-being than people who spend money on things. So there's all kinds of really important ways to think about the definition of success. And to go back to your question, right? I think about it as, do I end up in a place where I'm doing something meaningful in my life, right? Whether I call that a job or career or where, put the terminology aside. Am I doing something meaningful that makes use of my talents, right? The things that make me uniquely me. Am I using those every day, not once a month or once a year or once a week, right? Am I using my special talents on a regular basis? Am I doing something that's meaningful? And where I'm engaged in that, right? Like I have moments where I lose track of time because I'm so engaged in the work that I'm doing. And so anyway, back to this, this work, my work at Gallup started around trying to look at the linkages between those definitions of success, right? Having well-being and being engaged in your work, and what linkages those have to what you did in your educational experiences, right? And that's what sent me down this journey. And it turns out, it's not an overly complicated list of things. It's really, if I boil it down, it's whether you had relationship rich experiences during college and whether you were involved in work integrated learning experiences during college. And I can unpack that more. But since that work, since that research, since that that kind of question, I've just been on a different trajectory in terms of thinking about how I spend my time in the education world, and advising students and parents on how to make the most of their time in it.
For anyone who's not familiar with the Gallup-Purdue Index, and this landmark, groundbreaking study that Brandon was in charge of, and I've talked to John Pryor,
Yeah,
and I love John. John
yeah.
was
John is awesome.
one of the lead researchers for part of that project, and he was always giving me data through Harry, through the higher education research, or UCLA,
Yeah,
Harry, and the and also I talked to Jennifer Wallace, who was talking about how she uses the Gallup-Purdue Index in her work, and her book Never Enough and the new book Mattering. Uh, you know, Jeff Salingo, I believe, he uses that as well, and it's really amazing work that you did to be able to gather this data. And now when I'm helping parents and students to define success, because I've been obsessed with success lately. Like, I mean, not like trying to be successful, but this idea of when it comes to college, when it comes to internships, when it comes to jobs, it is amazing to me, shocking to me that students and parents don't pause before taking the next step and ask the question, how do you define success? How would you define your first year of college? How would you define success your first year of college? And then the parent reflecting and saying, here's how I would define success. And we don't even stop
yeah,
and pause. So we're working under the influence of what everybody else wants and how they define success
right.
without even teaching the skill of being able to answer that question, the life skills of what
Yeah,
contributes to that. So this is why I love so much of the work you do, and why, and this is a selfish conversation today, Brandon, because, and I'll probably have to have another one with you because I'm never gonna get it all in, is because I'm writing this book now. It's his book. It's kind of like The Naked Roommate Gets a Job, but it's the transition from college to career,
Yep.
and
Hugely important.
it's so big. I feel a bit of shame that I haven't done this sooner because the connection of high school to college to career, if you look at the success arc and you'd say, why are people going from high school to college or wherever they're going to learn and be mentored? It's to get a job, right? Like that's, and, I sell how to be successful in college, and I'm really great at that, but people aren't focused and as concerned about being successful in college because they wanna get in and they wanna get a
Right.
job.
Yep.
It's fascinating, and it's like
Yeah.
that stuff in between is kind of like not as important. So, I wanna stay on track. The Gallup-Purdue Index, just so everyone knows, and I love how you summarize it, the 6 different pieces. Do you like, are you able to just, like, rattle them off the top
Oh
of your
yeah.
head?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd rather have you do it because you are,
Yeah.
man, to hear it come out of your mouth would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's, look, to this day, it was and still is the largest representative study of college graduates in US history, right? Like there had not ever been one done. There probably will not be one done anywhere near its magnitude for a long time. It was one of those truly landmark events. But to your question, I'd mentioned earlier that there were really two categories of experiences that college students had that were related, doubles their odds of being engaged in their work and doubles their odds of thriving in their well-being later in life. And one bucket is what I called relationship rich experiences. And so the three items in that were I had professors who cared about me as a person. So, the professors at my alma mater cared about me as a person. The other one was I had at least one professor who made me excited about learning. And you may think like, well, geez, that bar, it must be everybody who had at least one, professor. It's about 60% of college graduates, which is to say that about 4 in 10 didn't have one professor who made them excited about learning, right? And then the third one, which was the most important one of everything in the study, and it was also the least common, was I had a mentor who encouraged my goals and dreams. A very strongly worded statement, right? And if you
Mhm.
strongly agree to it, and those who do, it's only 22% of college graduates in United States. But if you do, you immediately know the answer. It's not like well, let me think about that one a little bit. It's and immediately that person's name, or if you were lucky to have more than one, they're just instantly in your brain, right? Like when you hear that statement, you're like, and for me, it would be several people who I think of as that mentor who encouraged my goals and dreams. So those were the relationship rich
Mhm.
elements. And then on the work integrated learning ones, they were the most important one was I had a job or an internship where I was able to apply what I was learning in the classroom. And that second part of that is so important because we also asked in the study, did you have a paid job during college? And if you said yes to that, it had no relationship with anything later in life. Nothing. Now you earn money, you presumably, use that money to pay important bills, but it was whether or not you had a job or internship where there was some connection between it and what you were learning in the classroom. That's where the magic comes to life. And then, an example, one of the other ones there was I worked on a long-term project that took a semester or more to complete. By the way, that's another interesting one because you go, well, doesn't every college student do something like that? No, it's actually 32% who strongly agreed to that item. So it's
Right.
less than a third. And the final one was, and I think this is a really important one for high school students and parents as they're coming into college, is I was extremely involved in an extracurricular activity organization. Not I'm padding my resume with a long list of things that I was kind of lightly tangentially connected to. It was like I was deeply, meaningfully, lastingly engaged in at least one of those things. So I think it's a really different story than get involved in as many extracurricular activities as possible. Sure, do that to explore what you like and what you're interested in. But my big advice, my big takeaway from that study is get involved in something, one thing where you are lastingly, meaningfully engaged over the lifetime of your college experience or whatever that may be, right? So if you think about those three things, they're about not just I had a relationship with the professor, right? Like that's one bar that we need to meet. It was the depth of those relationships, right? It wasn't just that I did work. It was there was some connection between that work and learning. And I think even the nuances of that study are so instructive, right? And I'll just give you a quick example. When parents and students ask me for advice on it, I say, well, here's one: pick the professor, not the class. And usually some people take a minute to kind of understand what that means. And I was like, look, every campus I've ever been on, it is not a secret who the most famous mentors are as professors, right? If you go around, like, it's not on the website, you can't just glean it, but you ask around, who are the best professors here? Who are the rock star mentoring professors are known among students. There's no secret, and when you find that out, I don't care what you're majoring in, go try and take a class with that person, right? Like, go try to take a class. So where you can, I know that some courses are required for your major and etc., but like, pick the professor, not the course. Find those rock star mentors, find those rock star professors, and do what you can to take a class with them.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I just came back from a campus visit, and I have three sons, and my middle is very focused on music, and very specific instrument. And watching him go through this process has just been so fascinating, Brandon. It's like, first of all, there are so few people who could help when it comes to something that's so specialized. And then the second part is, when it comes to this particular process, he is reaching out directly to the professors, reaching
Yeah.
out directly to those teachers. And then you sometimes will have a lesson with them. You'll have some sort of contact with them. And the process of going through college search is really based on people. It's, who are those people who can teach you and who you feel, you can learn from, and are excited to, help you and support you. And it's like, why isn't that just how we do it for everyone?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like, and I was
Yeah.
thinking of you because I know
Yeah.
the idea of people, places, and patience and people. And those of you who don't know Brandon, we're so much aligned. It's like, I feel like we've been on parallel paths, and you have spent so much of your time, I mean, of course, starting off as an entrepreneur, and which I think is so fascinating, and then being part of a corporate culture, corporate structure. And I really haven't had that type of experience as much as you have. And, I've kind of been on the outside floating around, and you have really been living these other experiences. And I love hearing about them, because there are so many different pathways, and you've experienced, so many different career pathways in what you're doing, and what you've done. And I want to I want to start with you, and I'm going to save enough time to break into some of the myths you think students have, parents have when it comes to jobs, some of the myths with internships, some of the things that I absolutely need to communicate in this book. And if you'd be so kind, I'm I'm doing this I'm writing this book out in the open. This is not a big mystery. I'm not waiting a year and a half or 2 years to share things with people. I'm going to give everyone everything as I get it, so they can use it. And then the book is going to be a great way to organize all of these thoughts and ideas. And this conversation that we're having, I want to include this in the book. I want someone to be able to scan a code and see this conversation, and to be able to pull some of the quotes, and to be able to see the quotes from this book here that we're creating. So it's different, and I'm super nervous about it. Like, I'm scared. I am, because it's so
That's
much.
always a good thing.
Oh, I'm so scared about so many things right now,
Yeah.
Brandon. I am so nervous. And it's a good nervous and a good stress. And that's why the pressure of a conversation with you is so important to me, because I wanna get the value. I wanna get the marrow, the wisdom. And now I'm really building up the pressure for you. So it's even more intense. Now it's
And
like,
now I'm getting anxious. I mean, come on.
right, we're gonna be this is gonna be written and shared and put on tablets. Now, it's
Mhm.
not gonna be put on tablets, and I don't think anything I'd ever write would be put on a tab, unless it's on the ground and someone, wants to be. Anyway, all right, I gotta stay focused. No time for jokes. See, I joke when I get too serious, and I gotta stay focused, Brandon. This is my inner dialogue. So, when you started your career path, and also, if you could somehow weave in some of those 6 different factors that are part of that Gallup-Purdue Index, and I just wanna do one other side note because e something happened when I brought that up, and for any students who are listening, and for anybody who knows things, I have a problem where I like to be right, I like to be affirmed, it's one of my love languages, and I have the Gallup produced 6 factors right here on my notes, and I wanted to share them because it's like in this moment, I'm like, "Oh, I want Brandon to know that I know them, so he knows that I know them." But then I'm like, "Dude, like, you have the person who did this." So, this is a lesson is even if you know something and you're with someone who you know knows it, ask them to share it because how you just shared that is a way that I've never processed it before. Like, I've talked about these 6 factors before, and when you talked about the relationship 3 and the work-related 3, like, I missed that. So, like, the way you shared that was already, like, boom, so helpful. Alright, enough of my yabbering. Okay. So, when you were at Duke and you decided, what are you gonna do with your life, career choices? Can you help us to understand how you made that move when you graduated or what move you made?
Yeah, I go back and I try and think about this. I mean, because I get asked the question, well, how did you get to where you are? Just students wanting general career advice. And, one of the first things that I think about is that um, it's not linear. I know so few people whose careers have truly been linear, right? Like there's just this perfectly designed step function to where you are. If you had asked me even my senior year of college, what I was going to do, I wouldn't have told you build a career in the education space. It wouldn't even been on the top of my list. So I'll tell you, it's interesting. I went through a few major transitions and disruptions that kind of threw me into a zone of like, what am I going to do with my life? First one, honestly, Harlan, was going to Duke. I'd been recruited as an athlete. I was a decent student academically. It wasn't that I wasn't smart, right? But I went into Duke with this mindset, probably a problematic mindset, if you will, of thinking that Duke wanted me for my legs, not my brains, right? Like that's how I started. On one hand, you feel special. Ooh, you're an athlete, right? On the other hand, I knew right away that like I wasn't going pro in running, right? And even if you did, that probably wasn't a path to, a really fruitful life economically, unless maybe you're the best in the world, right? But but at the end of my freshman year, I got injured and my whole track career came off, the rails, right? And so first identity was I come into a place where I felt like I was there as an athlete, not a student who could compete academically. So I felt inferior to other students academically. I was intimidated by that part of Duke. Then a year in, track career, running career comes, literally, the wheels come off. I've got a hole in my right tibia. That was the end of the career of running. No, no big deal. But it sent me into this tailspin of like, well, should I be at Duke? Can I compete with Duke? At Duke, can I
Right.
still differentiate myself? Right. And then I got very involved in student activities. Like I got involved and eventually was elected class president. Right. And I wouldn't have had those opportunities without the track career having come to an end. It would have been impossible, at least for me to do. Now I share that because the other major point that I got to was the end of my junior year. I got involved in trying to do alternative events that didn't have alcohol. And I just believed that students who didn't want to party all the time needed an alternative option to that. And there wasn't much of it. Anyway, not to get into the weeds of this, but I became really unpopular for taking a stance on an issue that I felt was an important issue to take a stance on, right? And I went from a place of being popular as class president, right, to a place where there were op-eds written in the Duke Chronicle, the student newspaper, berating me for the role that I was taking as a student leader, right? And it got so bad, I can't even make this up. There was an article in the News and Observer, the local newspaper, that was titled "Formerly Reviled Duke Student, Now Trustee." This was an article written about me my senior year when, against all odds, from this really unpopular stance I took, I was elected to serve a term on the board of trustees at Duke as young trustee. Now, I share all those in really short, succinct fashion because I had multiple points in my college career as I came into Duke, during Duke, and towards the end, where I was like, who am I? Like, can I be successful? Like, what, how do I recover from this? Right. And I think those things, interestingly, help prepare me in ways that I would have never anticipated had I not. Right. So the first message is one of not looking at failure as failure, but trying to understand it as an opportunity, a redirection, a way to reinvent yourself, a way to, figure out how you overcome things. And I think right now, so many students and parents are so worried about failing, messing up, that they can't see their way out of that, right? And that's one message I have, is that I met lots of resistance, right? Stuff that admittedly didn't kill me, in a direct sense, but were really, really challenging things to overcome. And so I think that was part of it. But I'll just share one final story, as it relates to career transition. I didn't know what I was going to do. If you'd asked me sophomore year, I think I said I was going to go to law school. My pre-major advisor at the time told me I needed to be more realistic with my expectations because my grades weren't very good. And so like that dream came to a crashing halt with the guidance from my pre-major advisor. So even things like that, I was told by a pre-major advisor that I wasn't smart enough essentially to go to law school. Like that's essentially what I took in that advice. Right. So, but anyway, this is really interesting because at a place like Duke, and this is true at a lot of elite colleges and universities, right? Students only think that there's a handful of jobs to do when you graduate there, right? Like, yeah, you're pre-med and you go to med school, or you go to law school, or you go to investment banking or some, well-known consulting firm like McKinsey. And actually, I think, the idea of what is out there is constricted in our most elite colleges and universities, right? It's a narrow set of jobs. And I'll never forget, I had a professor who used to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, by the way, who decided to retire and spend his life teaching as his second career. And I'll never forget, he pulled me out of a class one day. He's like, Brandon, you should consider a career in sales. And like, of course, sales is like this dirty word among most people. It's like, what, and he's given this sales pitch about sales to, a Duke student. But I got to tell you, it was one of those things where, he said it to me in a way that I'd never listened. I'd never paid attention to some of the natural talents that he saw in me. And I never thought about, a career in sales or whatever it might be. Here's the point. I have not been in a role since college where I haven't been doing some kind of selling, the selling of ideas, the selling of fundraising for my company, right? As an entrepreneur, the actual sales of building a business, right? And so I think fundamentally, it was a mentor who saw something unique in me that I would have never seen. And I think we've got to listen for those things, because I wasn't looking for that. I wasn't looking for a job in sales, right? I had to listen to those things. And that's the other thing that I worry about, is that students aren't listening to those signals from other people about themselves.
Right. That professor, do you want to share his name, or do you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tony Brown. In fact, I was just down at Duke 3 weekends ago having lunch with him and his wife, Teddy. So he's retired now, but he's still somebody that I see regularly, and, has been a huge influence in my life.
Right. So that's one of the professors that would check the box. And then
Absolutely.
those experiences that you had when you just real briefly, when you get injured, if you're on some sort of scholarship, or you've been uh, admitted because of your athletic abilities, if you have some sort of injury, how does that impact your standing as a student?
Well, in some cases, right, there are, athletes who had full scholarships, those are typically honored. It depends, right? And these rules have shifted obviously dramatically since since I was an undergraduate. I mean, I graduated in 1999, so we're talking, a quarter of a century ago. And in NCAA speak and college scholarships, that's night and day. For me, it was just the loss of identity, right? That was the big issue. There was no implication to my standing at Duke or whatever, but it was the loss of identity as
Yeah.
I'm here as an athlete. That's the thing that really lets me stand out in a crowd of incredibly talented people. And that just, it felt like it just suddenly went away. Right. And you sit
Yeah.
there and you look around, you go, well, how do I compete here? Right. Compete
Right.
meaning on all these other levels. And so that was the devastating loss, was the loss of identity and feeling lost in terms of finding who I am at Duke if
Yeah.
I'm not there as a runner. Right.
So being so rejected, reviled, rejected, I want to understand your relationship with rejection. And this is also something I'm going to really talk a lot about in the book, because I
Yeah.
think the definition of success and your relationship with rejection are so crucial in terms of the ability to focus more on the uninhibited curiosity versus the unstoppable fear of shame, humiliation,
Yeah.
disappointment. So I want to understand. I don't know if you've really thought in depth about your relationship with rejection, but how what was your relationship with rejection in college, and if you could even let me know how has it evolved?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think, I don't know when it was that I kind of turned my attitude about failure, but it probably started from athletics. It probably started from high school, where there was a race I wanted to win and I didn't win it, or the elusive state championship that we wanted to win as a cross country team. And you know what? We were runners up my senior year, and that still stings. And so,
That's wow.
but what I started to reflect on, Harlan, was that I feel like I learned, and maybe this is just unique to me, but this was the mindset shift. I spent a lot more time thinking about the losses, like the race that I didn't win would be the analogy in high school, or a goal I had that I didn't meet. I've had so many goals that I've set for myself. I have achieved very few of them. Like, that's just the honest truth. Like, there are goals that I've set. And if I were to list, of the 100 goals I've had in the last 20 years, right, I may have hit 5 of them, right, which is a pretty big failure rate. But I think I spend more time reflecting on and then building drive around having not met one of those goals. And then what I started to realize was that in setting those goals, even though I didn't hit many of them or all of them, I yearning for that got me forward, right?
Right.
So you can fall short of a goal and still get better. You can fall short of a goal and still see the incredible progress you made on the way there, right? So failure is not a black and white thing, right? It has different, grades of gray in terms of how you think about it, as does success, right? You can think about things where you're like, oh, I was really successful, and you go, well, really? Was that all to your credit? Were you just on a good team? Right. So I think about that with athletes all the time. There's people with championship rings who didn't get on the court. Okay. And then there's folks that carried their teams, never won the championship, got very close to it. Right. I mean, there's just a lot of ways to think about that. So I think with me, at least, I started to realize that those moments of failure, which hurt a lot, were ones that really motivated me. And I'll never forget, there was a coach, actually, who bet against me in a race. A coach. This was in high school. Another high school coach. And when I heard that he had bet against me, it was just a fun bet. It was like, oh, I think so and so is going to win the race, not that Busteed kid. When I heard that, I wanted to prove him wrong, right? I was motivated by, things like that more so than, oh, I'm going to win that race. Like, it was almost like I wanted to prove him wrong more than I wanted to win the race. And so I think, the learning from failure part and being motivated from failure has been a really, really important driver of both college and career since, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that I have set out to do that I've failed to do. And if I just constantly focused on that, I think it would be debilitating. But in kind of understanding that that's where I get my motivational grist, and that's where I've learned more. I learned more from failures than I did successes. So I think the learning value of failure is another one, right? A lot of students and parents appreciate, learning, right, as a goal. I think there's a lot of value in learning from failure. And so to think about it that way, what am I learning from this, right? What's the growth that comes
Right.
to it? I think it's a mindset shift. It's a growth mindset around failure. And I think that's, it's tricky to get there. But I think once you do, you just start to,
Yeah.
you feed off of it in a productive way.
Yeah. One of the things I want to really make clear is the law of rejection. This natural law, and I've shared this with you before, that should be on the periodic table of elements. It says not everyone and everything will always respond to me
Yeah.
the way I always want, and I can be the
Yeah.
best, the brightest, say the right things, do all the right things, have the best job interview, follow all the suggestions that Brandon's going to offer, and I still may not get the job. But what I'm going to get is data, and that data is going to inform me. And I think when it comes to growth mindset, grit, and these wonderful books and approaches, I think the missing piece is this law of rejection, which gives us a third question when we don't get the outcome we want. Is it me? Is it someone or something else? Or is it the law of rejection?
Yeah.
And it forces us to be observers, and it forces us to reflect in a way where we don't internalize it to the point where we feel such deep shame, because our job isn't to feel good or bad. Our job is to process the data so we can use it to move forward. And, just think, naturally through your own resilience, you developed this skill set to be able to take outcomes and to not have that outcome be a reflection of your value or self-worth, or maybe in the beginning you did because you were always trying to prove yourself.
Yeah.
But then once you do prove yourself, then it becomes this big question of what next and why is this important, which for me, even in the past 5 years, reaching a place of, I want people to like me, but they don't need to like me. And if they don't like me, I like to know why, because I can ask myself, is it me? Is it someone or something else? Or is it the law of rejection? You may just not like me for lots of different reasons. And that's okay. That's great. Now I know. Spend my time and energy. I care. When people say I don't care, I say, it's not that you don't care. You don't care to spend time focusing on it.
Yeah.
I think we all care. We just choose, but rejection really gets in the way. So, all right, you went to Duke. I want to make sure I'm being very conscious of time, because I want to. There's a few things I absolutely need to get out of this conversation, uh, but I need to know. You go from being a graduate Duke to starting this education ed tech startup. And I just want to know, like, how did you do this? How did you figure out? Is there a way you can sum that up so people can understand how you made that leap?
Yeah.
It's a big
It comes from repeated attempts of failure at one thing. So it's interesting. When I graduated, I'd become very involved as a student leader, right? And I mentioned, trying to build a social environment at a place like Duke where alcohol-free social lives existed, right? And that really started to set off a bit of a nerve at the time. I hit a nerve, I think, in that era, because that was also the height of, at the time, the Harvard School of Public Health's famous binge drinking study on college students. And so this topic of binge drinking and college students was in the news constantly.
Yeah.
We were at near all-time high rates of binge drinking at that time. By the way, they've been down considerably. Like today, it's not an issue in comparison to what it was in the 90s, for example. But so it was in that context that when I graduated as a senior, I had a simple idea. I had an idea around treating students like adults, helping them to make their own decisions about something like whether they choose to drink, and if so, and in what type of fashion. And this was at the advent of online courses, like the very, very beginning of the online ed tech world. I mean, Blackboard was founded, I think, in 1998. I graduated in 99, right? So, I mean, we're literally talking the early days of where truly, asynchronous online courses were popping up. And so it was just an idea. I didn't set out to start a company. It was something that flowed naturally from something I got involved with as a student, something that I was passionate about, a huge issue that I saw needed to be addressed in a much more proactive and practical way. And so I decided to start a company. But before I started the company, I thought, this is about this needs to be a nonprofit because I'm addressing this issue of college binge drinking, right? And so this because it's a mission based thing, it must be a nonprofit, right? So, um, I had a couple colleagues who were involved in trying to help start this as a nonprofit. We wrote, I think, 17 grants to different philanthropies, and we didn't get a single one of them to fund what we were doing. So I went 0 for 17 on trying to start this thing as a nonprofit with foundations and other philanthropists, and then I had a fortuitous meeting with somebody who said, "Well, Brandon, why don't you just make it a business?" I was like, "Huh?" you know, it's a social mission thing. And they're like, no, 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 like you can still make a business out of this. Right. And that prompt led me to starting outside the classroom. And, it was funded by angel investors who got the social mission, right, but who also understood that there was the potential of building a real business out of it. And so, to make it, a more succinct summary of the story, it was something that flowed from my college experiences in a way where somebody like an advisor or catalyst kind of said, well, wait a minute, think about this in a slightly different way. And so I had intended to start out launching a business. I ended up doing that. That then became 12 years of building outside the classroom before it was acquired by EverFi. And there's very little that I would go back and do differently. I mean, at this point now, about 15 million college students have taken the online alcohol EDU course, which was the flagship program of outside the classroom. So, I mean, immeasurable impact from a mission perspective, and built a reasonably successful business in the process.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's a great story because, while you were doing that, I'm working on helping students to be able to prepare for the social, emotional, physical, financial, and academic transitions. And what's interesting is the pain point that I'm dealing with isn't as pronounced and important when it comes to the administrators and when it comes to the general public. So,
Yeah.
and this is where I figured it out. And another conversation of just, I want to share with you where my best first year college success and coaching program is. It's for high school and college parents and for students, but it solves a problem. And it's a problem that reflects what is success and how do we set students up for success as opposed to success being the prize of getting in, but
Yeah.
success being a real clear understanding of the outcome, the high school to college to career. Because if you start at career and then you go down to internships, research opportunities, experiences, and then you go down to college admissions, and then you go to college search. It's this wonderful through line that I am really excited to share because that idea of success, like just this idea of like, what is success? It's, I mean, I've been looking for more people to just help families, help students, every day, what is success? What to me for success today was to have a conversation with you where I prepared the best I possibly could. I took my notes, I tried to get everything I could out of it, and simply the act of doing this, and I know I'm not going to get everything I need. But simply the act of doing this and having this conversation is a huge success. And every day. And I'm not going to get to all my goals, but I think just like these they're big, but they're just these small things that we don't teach because we're not focused on the process. And you're an expert on process and breaking down process. So when it comes to students who are looking at career options, who, let's just say, that freshman year, Brandon, what are some essential things that you would tell or suggest a student who, and this is a key, a student who's willing to listen to you?
Yeah.
Because I think that willingness to listen and learn and not be right is so key. So, what would you tell them? How would you direct them?
Well, the thing that I'm most concerned about right now for both high school and college students is that today, as we sit here, young adults are the least working generation in U.S. history, right? And you say, okay, well, what's the big deal with that? Well, if you want to know what you like or don't like in order to decide what you might major in or not, and therefore where you might go to school, right? I believe that, you need to have as many opportunities to touch real things as possible, right? Like to understand the various jobs that are out there in the world. You're not going to know all of them, right? But the more you know and have some exposure to, the better, right? I look at, my biggest piece of advice is to look for the learning value in all work, right? So many high school students will have jobs where they're doing fairly menial jobs, right? Retail. And I was a cashier at Ponderosa Steakhouse. I used to do screen printing of t-shirts on a hand, screen printing press, right? I mean, I've been in, roles like that. But to be aware of the fact that there's rich, valuable learning in all work. And so, that's what I'm worried about. We don't have work experiences because in some cases we have very well-intentioned parents who will say, well, Harlan, your job is to get good grades, right? We can afford to not have you work. For some students, they can't afford not to work. That's a different ballgame. But to not appreciate the learning value in work is our biggest missed opportunity. And then I would say, short of thinking about things like jobs or internships or whatnot, there are some really easy steps that I encourage students to take. And you can do this at pretty much any age. Interview half a dozen people that you know who are in different jobs, right? Or show up at a couple of, workplaces and say, hey, I'd love to interview somebody, or do a quick shadow of what they're doing, right? I mean, even the simple step of asking somebody like, hey, Brandon, like, what do you do in a typical day? Like, what does an X or Y do if you think about, jobs? So this is a really good stat. There's about 40,000 jobs in the world in terms of job classifications and categorizations. If you ask students unaided to just list the number of jobs that they're thinking about or whatever, they usually can't get past 10. So we have a really limited understanding of the universe that's out there, right? So it's almost like we go backwards. It's like, hey, choose your college first, then decide what you want to major. That major, should be linked to something you want to do career-wise. When, the reality is we should be flavoring a bunch of career options, then going, okay, what might that mean for my major? And then deciding a university based on that. It's almost like we've done the reverse engineering of what the optimal way of discovering that is. So now let's translate that. What would I do as a student? I would be looking for internship opportunities long before my junior or senior year, which is when many of them, they think about it on the back end of their college experience. And I would be, thinking about what are the classes. This is a tough one, where they are going to work on some form of long-term project. A lot of students run from those classes because they're hard. They're worried they're going to get a bad grade. But I would argue the experience of doing a class that requires a capstone project or some sort of multi-week project is going to be one of the most valuable things that they do. And the earlier they do that in their college experience, the better in terms of preparing them, aligning them to a major, helping them understand what other courses they might want to take before they graduate. Those experiences are really, really important. And I don't think we've thought about experiences as guiding our academic journey, but I think they're really important guides of our academic journey.
Yeah, number one, experiences. So when you are interviewing, let's say more recent grads, you've done that over the span of your career, correct?
Yeah.
You've hired a lot of people. How many people would you estimate you've hired?
I mean, within the teams that I've run or led, I don't know, let's say 500 over the course of the last 25
All
years.
right, from startup to being CEO
Yeah.
and leadership roles in between. So, when you are interviewing someone, what are some things that jump out to you that make your brain light up in a really happy way when you're having that conversation?
Yeah. So one of the questions I ask is when I'm asking them about some of their previous roles or experiences, right? I say, well, what was it that you were doing in that role that you just felt like, you know, you were great at, right? Like what was that moment? Like what were you doing that you really felt like you were firing on all cylinders, right? Or in flow. There's a concept called flow that I know you're really well aware of. It's like these moments where people are doing something that they're excellent at, and in that excellence, it's like they lose track of time because they're just locked in on this thing that they're doing that, they do better than anybody else in the world. Right. So I'm trying to, understand where people, if they have, and I hope they have, experienced flow in the past. And it's so interesting to hear people process, do the thinking around that question. They think back either to their most immediate role, or they go back to something they did, in college or in school, that they were just like, oh yeah, that, like, I was really good at that. And so the reason why I asked that question is because it tells you a lot about, first of all, are they interviewing for the right role? I think there's a lot of people that will apply for jobs thinking that job is going to be a good fit for them, and it may or may not. They like the title, they like the pay, right? Some of the, back to this definition of success, there's a lot of ways we can think about that. But I think fit to role is really important. And fit is about, certainly if you think at an organizational level, it's about the values and culture. Do they fit with your personal values, et cetera? But there's fit to a role. Am I going to put Brandon, this person who's interviewing with me, into a job where they are going to be successful with what they're doing? A lot of that is about thinking about their moments where they touch that moment where they're doing something that they really love, that they're really, truly great at. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of students that come out of school and they don't really know how to answer the question, what are you really good at? Like, what are your talents? What are your gifts that are different than, not what certification did you get, or not what skill did you learn? Like, to think about, those kinds of moments that you were like, oh yeah, I did something that came naturally to me. I did something that I felt like I was really, really good at. And those are really, really, first of all, tough questions for people to answer. And the ones who do answer it, they usually light up, and it usually tells me a lot about what they will, how they'll succeed, where they can succeed. Right. And even if if the role is the right fit, it's already helping me shape how I might mold that role around that individual talent. Right. And I think that's a really important way to think about hiring and fit.
Yeah. I think it's when you see their light turn on, when you ask them that, and then, because I have
Yeah,
those moments with you all the time where it's like I'm ready to jump through the screen because of the excitement of being able to share something, and it's like a constant. It's like, you
yeah,
feel that, and I don't think enough students understand how to even allow themselves to feel that.
yeah,
The exercise of how do you align with your light and communicate that, which I think that question really reflects in many ways. And then, Brandon, what are some of the red flags, things that instantly make you think, man, we don't even need to continue this, but you still have to continue it?
yeah. Well, look, I think it's, to some level, somebody who has done zero homework about your organization, right, and shows zero enthusiasm for what you're doing. I mean, that to me is one of the easiest non-starters, and it comes out right away. I think let me touch on, so that's one simple answer, right?
Yeah.
But I want to touch on the thing that may be the most important consideration for a candidate who's being interviewed. And it should also be of interest to, the hiring manager, right? So I know a lot of college students who graduate, get a job, and actually have no idea who their manager is going to be when they report for their first day of work, right? So I was in a class of, I did a guest lecture, all seniors in this class, top tier institution. I said, how many of you have a job? Almost every hand went up. I'm like, way to go. You're rocking it. I was like, now, next question. How many of you know the manager you're going to be working for in that job? 3 hands went up in a room of 20 students. 3. So they had interviewed with, I'm going to pick on big consulting firm, right? Investment banking firm, right? They got the job, and they actually don't know who they're working for in that job. 70% of the variance for whether you're engaged in your job is who your manager is. Like, your world in work, almost like your world in a class, is about the professor in that classroom, right? Like, that professor is motivating, they are inspiring, or they're a total jerk, and they're constantly harping on what you don't do well and what you got wrong. The same thing applies for managers. There's great managers and there's real duds out there. right? And the difference in your ability to grow and thrive and succeed in that role is much less about the paycheck. It's much less about the brand name of the company. It's really about who is that manager, right? And are they a person who's going to really get to understand you and what makes you uniquely you in your role, right? How to develop you in that role. So this is advice I give all the time is for managers who are doing the interview to talk about their management style, to say, here are the things that matter to me as a manager of my team. The people who thrive under me do these kinds of things, right? And then there's that famous question at the end of every interview where the interview goes, Harlan, do you have any questions for me? Right. And that's where most interviewees totally phone it in. They're like, yeah, no, I'm good, and it's like, that's the one where you go, yeah, tell me about your management style, right? Like, how do you get the most out of your team, right? What are the things that you emphasize, right? The understanding that is more important to your trajectory at work than anything I can possibly think of.
So when a student's answering that question and they're thinking, who's my manager? Who am I going to be reporting to? So you're saying that when you're in that job interview, even if that person isn't the one interviewing you, because at some of these large firms, you're not necessarily going to be talking to your team leader to ask them that question. How would you suggest they bring that up during the interview? And also, if somebody is thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even know who my team leader is
Yeah.
going to be. How do I do this now?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, truthfully, I know in some of these firms, right, their hiring process is such that, they don't assign candidates they hire to teams until, they're essentially onboarded. So but put that aside, right? I think in the vast majority of jobs that a recent college graduate is going into, it is either known who the manager is or it can be known relatively quickly, right? So I'm sure there's a couple outliers and caveats in there. But I think, in the absence of knowing that, first ask the question, be like, hey, can you tell me who I'll be working for or what team I'll be working on? They may say something like that. And you can say, well, tell me about, the person who leads that team, right? What do they want out of their team? I think you can ask some of those questions. You get asked those questions. They may not have an answer. The hiring person may not have a great answer for you, but in asking them, it tells that interviewer a lot about you're pretty astute. You're an astute observer of what makes for success in the workplace. And that's very much about, one, being on a team where you've got a motivating manager, right, who's there to care about your development. The worst place you can be, this is a famous Gallup study, right? The most engaged people have a manager who gets to know them as a person, right, pulls their strengths out into their role, gives them lots of feedback. What's worse is a manager who gives you no feedback at all. You'd rather have one that constantly gives you critical feedback, even though that stinks in comparison to a motivational one. But the no feedback at all is the worst place to be, right? You don't know if you're doing good. You don't know if you're doing bad because you got a manager that just doesn't communicate to you at all. So I think if you ask a couple of those questions and you get a lot of blank stares or non-answers, that would be a red flag as an interviewee about that job, about that organization, right? Is that you've got people in HR or roles that are involved in interviewing and can't really answer those questions very well about management style, which teams you're going to be on. That would be a huge red flag for me as a soon to be employee.
All right, one more question today, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a follow up, and I'm going to ask you some more questions if you're willing to answer them.
Yeah, all good.
It's about the employment piece, and really being able to ask the right questions, and for people who are on this career path to understand how to approach these answers. We talk so much about big businesses, big companies, and my father worked for big companies for a while, and then the climate changed, and he started his own company. He's an insurance agency, and I'm really familiar with small business, and I have a small business, and I think
Yep.
there's so much power in small business because there's so many people who have had these leadership roles and have gone through the corporate structure, and they now are like, I want to do it my way or better, and I want to have a small business. But I
Yep.
see so few graduates really targeting small businesses as a entryway to the workforce. Have you thought about that? Do you think that's a good pathway?
I have a strong bias towards exactly what you're describing, right? A lot of students will be well aware of the Fortune 500 company in town, or coming to campus to do the interview process. I think where there's limitless opportunity are in all the small and medium sized organizations that they're usually not thinking about, right? And I'll give a good example. When I was in Boston shortly after I started my company, it was about a year into it. I had 12 employees at the time. We were in offices in Needham, Massachusetts, not too far from Northeastern University, and we started to hire co-op students from Northeastern. Well, the reason why I bring this up is that the first co-op student that we hired was a woman named Kimberly Durkin, and she was a marketing major, and she came on for 6 months of her co-op, and I made her our director of marketing because I didn't have a director of marketing, Harlan, right? I was so small
Right.
as this teeny tiny startup that this co-op student came in, and I literally was like, "You're the director of marketing." She looked at me like I was crazy, and I was like, I got nothing to lose. You got nothing to lose. Go for it, right? And look, there's no doubt that her experience in learning about a business, because it was a smaller operation, right? She got more exposure to the various nooks and crannies of the organization than she would have in a much larger one. In a larger one, you might work for a division and a particular role for one function, right? But I am a huge fan of the idea of students looking for those small enterprises, because they end up having an opportunity to play a bigger role in the organization. If you just think about it statistically, Kim Durkin was at the time I hired her, 1/13th of my workforce. Like, she mattered a lot and was in a role where, she kind of got to run with it. Right. And she made mistakes, but I was excited to have her in that job because I didn't have a director of marketing. So I think they're incredible opportunities, and it might not stand out on your resume as much as saying, "Oh, I worked at McKinsey," a name that everybody knows. But I got to tell you, the experience, the value of the learning in one of those smaller enterprises, I think is really impossible to beat.
How many of those people did you hire again or work with again from those earliest days, people you got to trust and respect?
Well, quite a few. I think we had, if my count is right, we had about 14 co-op students during my time at outside the classroom, and I think we hired 5 of the 14.
Yeah.
And they all and those 5 all had job offers before they
Yeah.
graduated, and I mean, it was a pretty high hit rate for sure.
And I bet from those days to Gallup to Kaplan to now at Edconic, and I'll include a lot about Edconic. I'm gonna mention, earlier on the intro, I mentioned it because
Yeah.
it's fantastic. What you're doing makes so much sense, and I'm gonna link to the best podcast or interview you've ever had, 'cause before this, I always do my research, and Brandon said that he had his best podcast, best interview ever. And I'm like, "Oh, man, the best one ever." Well,
Yeah.
clearly I need to be the best above I need to somehow exceed this, which I don't know, maybe every time you're like, "Oh, that was the best." So
No, I don't dish it out all the time like that. Yeah, that was
it was really good. I'm gonna link to that because that
yeah,
really tells the Edconic story in a way that I didn't wanna repeat because it was so well done. So we'll
yeah,
make sure to include that. And man, I am so grateful. I'm so lucky. And the thing is, you're younger than me. This is another thing. Because I graduated in '95. I'll date myself. I
okay.
don't care. But the thing
Yeah,
is,
we're not too far off.
well, I look at you as like a mentor. I look at age doesn't matter. It's what people. I seriously look at that because what you've done, and I like my biggest mistake is not asking for help soon enough and being too siloed, which isn't a huge mistake because I'm now doing so many different things and can bring
Yeah.
it. But like that's I just really like the way you think, and I really love your story, and I know so many people are gonna benefit from this. So I just wanna thank you again, Brandon, for being so generous. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure always to talk to you. I try to listen to every one of your video clips that you post on LinkedIn. I'm not on the other social channels
Okay.
that I know you're big on, but I love hearing your advice. I love the way that you convey it to people, and it's helpful for me because I've got a now sophomore and a freshman in high school. So your advice is very relevant in my world. So thank you for all that.
That's great. Well, we're gonna continue this offline, and I'm gonna send you the follow-up, And,
Awesome.
this book's gonna be out there, and, people are gonna get to see Brandon, and you're gonna get to experience this. So, but I wanna thank you again, and I'll put it to be continued as I always do, and I'd love for people to get to know you, follow you. Find Brandon on LinkedIn. He has some of the most compelling, uh, articles. You're a terrific writer, great researcher. I just can't say enough wonderful things. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Harlan. Appreciate it.